Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I think some people have sort of an exalted idea of what goes on at the university level. Many of us who teach there realize that so often we just can't presuppose much at all in the ordinary classroom, that we have to begin from scratch so often. And I used to just despair of finding almost any book that most students had read, or any body of knowledge that one could just carry with them.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Professor James Larson, Director of the Honors Program at the University of Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of teaching the gifted. Here's Father Bacik.
Jim, I'm happy that you have taken time off from a busy schedule during exam week to come and talk with me on this program. Since you are the director of the Honors Program at the University of Toledo, and my boss currently, since I'm teaching a class in your program, I thought maybe we could talk a bit about the Honors Program. How does that sound to you?
Sure, that's fine. I'd like nothing better than to talk about the Honors Program.
You get free publicity for your program that way.
Use lots of that.
I think that when we begin to talk about that topic, it perhaps fits into the general question of how we deal with the more gifted students in our educational system, because judging by the quality of students that I had in my course this quarter, we are dealing with the students who are brighter and perhaps especially willing to work harder at their studies. And I wonder, perhaps there is a more general interest in it from that aspect of how we deal with the gifted or more skilled or more interested students throughout their educational careers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are three kinds of advantages that students should be given who are identified as gifted. Three unique opportunities that might not necessarily come to other students. First of all, it seems to me that honors students or gifted students, superior students, should have a high degree of flexibility in putting together a curriculum. Not only would that be true in the curriculum, but also in the course that the student is taking. There should be enough room for individual initiative, enough room for the student to explore. So that, for me, is one of the most important
Okay, maybe we stay with that for a moment. One of the parts of that is that I suppose these people think of themselves as self-starters, or that they have more or clearer ideas on what they want to study, or they take greater initiative in that kind of matter. So you would like to see them have flexibility in all of that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
No, just thinking of a gifted student that I knew at Oxford. Mm-hmm. This pops in my mind, and he was educated totally on an ad hoc basis. That is, his father was well-to-do, and I don't know how they arranged all this, but that when he would show an interest in something, then his father would find a tutor for him. Mm-hmm. He was educated totally that way. If he was started to read something and he had to know French to read it, his father would get him a French tutor, and so on. And this man, the young man, was a remarkably brilliant young man and well-educated in that way, totally in a flexible way. And he told me he had a brother who was in the same family and everything, and knew almost nothing, and was almost uneducated because he never asked his father to find him a tutor, or he never showed any particular interest in any subject. So right within the same family, you had two youngsters, and they were going to educate them in this very, very flexible way. One took tremendous advantage of it, and one just couldn't handle it.
That's remarkable. That reminds me of Montaigne's essay on education. Have you read that?
No. Why don't you talk about it?
Montaigne, as a young, when he was 2 or 3, found himself I think they weren't a noble family at that time, but his father was very well-to-do and decided that he wanted his son to have what today we would call a liberal education. So he hired tutors to tutor him in whatever kind of thing that he deemed important in his education. one of the most significant facts, I think, has to do with the way Montaigne learned languages. Then, those days, Latin was the language of commerce as well as the language of everything else. And in order to ensure that young Montaigne learned his Latin, his father set down this requirement in the household that none of the servants, none of the tutors, neither the wife, the other children in the family, even the stable boy had to speak in Latin in the presence of young Montaigne. And as a result, the entire community became very gifted in the use of Latin, and Montaigne grew up thinking that Latin was his native language, not French. The same thing was true, though. The Father Montaigne, kept that kind of control over his son's education in anything he was interested in. And it turned out a remarkable intellect, I think. I think Montaigne as a philosopher is one of the most interesting people.
It appears as though that this idea of fostering interest in learning is important, that creating a kind of climate where people will want to explore. And I think perhaps families need to think of that generally, don't they? I mean, in raising their children. I mean, just getting them to read or being interested in reading, providing materials for them. I know in talking to teachers of grade school youngsters, they're always looking for that cooperation from the parents. So if the parents will work with the youngsters at home and foster this sense of education, that seems to be an important part of the whole thing, a sort of creation of wonder. Think of the Kennedy family, the way they used to talk about how they would talk about public affairs at the dinner table, and there would be a topic, and the conversation would revolve around that. I suppose not many ordinary families really would go to that extreme, but it would seem like more could be done that way. And maybe the gifted children would get more identified that way, or get more help right within the home to be encouraged to think on their own and to explore things themselves and so on.
That puts me in mind of an important distinction that I think we need to make, and that is the distinction between sophistication, let's call it, and intellectual potential. IQ, I don't know what other word you want to use. I think that a great many students, a great many human beings have an enormous intellectual potential, but they are not necessarily sophisticated. Now, often what is happening in the kind of educational experience that we're talking about, Montaigne's education or the Kennedy family education, I think what's happening there is that students are acquiring sophistication, not necessarily increasing, developing their intellectual potential. I think, therefore, that teachers, parents need to be very aware of that distinction, and very aware of what it is that they're having as a goal for their young charges, whether they're their own children or their students. In the honors program, I see over and over again, the honors program that you have taught in, that I've worked in so many years, I see over and over again students who, at first view, don't seem to be terribly gifted, terribly talented, but they have enormous intellectual potential. They lack, however, sophistication. And
because of background and so on, because they haven't had the opportunities, or weren't pushed, or didn't do the reading, or didn't travel, or didn't encounter a larger intellectual world, or don't know the particular articulations of the thoughts they have and so on.
Well, I think that's by and large the cause of lack of sophistication. I'm not sure that sophistication is necessarily a good thing. I hope that's clear in what I'm saying. I think that often sophistication is just a culturally determined affair, and it changes from culture to culture. Some cultures require that students know a great many foreign languages, and that they be very gifted in the arts and in music. Those kinds of cultures are disappearing, I might say. Others that students be very adept in sciences, in mathematics, and I'm sure there are cultures that we don't know much about that have other kinds of criterion.
When we look at the American scene, how would you think of the way we're doing that now, or what kind of criteria we're setting up?
Well, it seems to me that we long for sophistication in science in the United States, science and mathematics, that it's there that jobs are available, that students can realize the American dream, find wealth.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's there that we don't seem to have the people who are skilled. I mean, over and over is hearing that we don't have the resources to put people in teaching math and science in our schools. The corporations siphon them off and so on, and that we could use so many more people along that line.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to the Sputnik thing, that I mean, that seemed to, what was that, 1957? Do I have that?
56, wasn't it?
Was it that? And that changed then, or when the Russians put that vehicle up, that it said, hey, they might be ahead of us, and we have to do more in the sciences and so on. Maybe we started looking for gifted people at that time in the science area, or tried to beef up our programs and so on. And I don't know that would, from this range now, that it would look all that successful if we don't keep talking about not having enough engineers, not enough mathematicians, and so on.
We have enough engineers and enough mathematicians, enough scientists, but the complaint today is that they're not teaching in the public schools. They're not employed where they're going to do the greatest good.
And that, I imagine, is a lot financially. That's the problem is that they are not remunerated properly in the schools. Yeah.
A public school teacher, this is an average statistic that I happen to remember, a recent study indicated that a person who had been teaching 12 years in the public school systems was paid average salary in the United States $17,000 a year. That's just not enough to live on, raise a family on, especially after 12 years.
Especially if you put it into comparison what these same people can make in the corporate world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the need for mathematicians and scientists in the public schools and teaching is desperate.
Okay, Jim, we were talking about this first thing that you said was flexibility that we needed, right, in the programs for the gifted people. And we have to identify these young people, right? And I guess the direction we were going in is to saying that families could help with this, and that teachers need to be alert, and that we need to give them the opportunity to have a sense of wonder and develop themselves in various ways.
I think families, the reason I wanted to make that distinction between intellectual potential and sophistication is that I think families can help kids acquire sophistication. I'm not sure how much families can do in a family setting anyway to help students acquire, develop, enhance intellectual potential.
Where's that going to happen? In the schools?
I think that's has to happen in the schools. I think that it needs the kind of careful control of the classroom and the direction of somebody who has the background, training, experience, expertise, if you will, in the subject matter.
How do you build this flexibility into the honors program at the University of Toledo?
Well, one of the things that we've done over the years is to remove virtually all requirements from our students. As you know, universities throughout the United States require students to take a great many kinds of things. Those subjects generally fall into a couple of categories. There are certain core courses that students must take, like math and English. Certain, we call them distributive courses, where they have a block of coursework taken from the humanities, another block from the social sciences, and a third block from the natural sciences. And then, finally, the requirement that a student must major in something, know some one thing in depth. Now, the thinking, I believe, the thinking behind these various requirements is very sound. The thinking is that we should know, in order to call ourselves educated, we should know a little bit about everything, but we should know one thing in depth. That's an idea that's at least 2,000 years old. What we have done in the honors program is to remove those requirements. in part we've done it because students come to us generally well educated. I think in spite of all of the criticism, I think that the high schools are, in some cases anyway, doing a very good job. Our students...
That would be encouraging to a lot of people to hear, I think.
Well, we're talking about maybe 30 students. Well, in the honors program, there are 120 students. In the College of Arts and Sciences, there are close to 5,000 students.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about a good job for 120 students out of 4,000 or 5,000.
And those are students who, when they went through high school, probably were more interested in learning and therefore got more out of the material that was presented.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Why they are more interested, why they got more,
Mm-hmm.
is we could speculate on that
Right.
endlessly. And surely family
Mm-hmm.
background is part of it. I think,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, I think genetic construction is another
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
So you get rid of the requirements.
We get rid of the requirements completely. And part of the reason that we do that is that the student comes to us already with some in-depth learning and some broad understanding of all the kinds of subjects that generally make up a curriculum. So what we want for the student in the university is that he have the opportunity to go at his own speed, which almost always is faster than normal, and to explore the things that he finds himself curious about, particularly interested in, and a course, the typical course or the requirements often stand in his way, keep him from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've removed all requirements. Now, I should say that the student does not wander aimlessly around the academic landscape doing whatever he feels like doing. That would be a disaster. I think that was the kind of experiment that was tried in the late 60s and 70s, and it was always disastrous. But what we have done is to supplement or replace the requirements with careful academic advising.
Mm-hmm.
The student who's in the honors program works with an academic advisor, recommending that the student study particular kinds of courses, work with particular people on the faculty who we know to be interested in the same subject the student is interested in. In short, the advising system has replaced the system of requirements. The advisor cannot make should not make a requirement of students, but he should recommend. He can recommend. And,
of course, you have then the readings that many of the students have done. A lot of the students that I had in the honors program, one of the striking things that happened to me when I walked in the first class, and I was teaching a course on the problem of evil in contemporary fiction, as you know, and the first theologian we were taking was Augustine, and we were dealing with him in relationship to John Updike's short story, as I recall it. And so one of the first things I started asking was, about Augustine, who's, after all, died back there in 430, and a long time ago, and so on. How many people had read his famous work, The Confessions, and I think there were 10 out of 15 students or so who had read that. And that was rather remarkable happening. You couldn't walk in the room of anybody, I don't think, and find out that 10 out of 15 people have read this particular work by Augustine. And so it was a striking thing to me, and I guess that occurred because many of these students were in a readings program where they were engaged with the great books, which strikes me as an interesting way of going about learning. I often thought in designing a theology curriculum, which I'm so interested in and so on, that even that one of the ways of doing it would be to, instead of people reading the summary type authors and so on, is to go right back there to the original sources and to read those great books. And I think people would know so much more at the end of that, to have encountered these great thinkers and wrestled with their ideas and somehow made that their own. I really liked it the other day when I saw one of my students after the whole course was over, and he was saying, the way we took those people and dealt with their ideas and so on, he said it almost seemed easy. It's like their ideas become part of you, and without much effort, they just sort of seep into your thinking. And he found that, I guess, in writing his paper and so on. I really like that. I thought, well, that's terrific, way of learning. But I know that in your program, at least some of your students have read those fundamental works like that.
There's so many things to respond to in what you've just said. I'm not sure which.
We're
which
still
one
on
to take.
point one of the three things
I realize that.
Flexibility, Jim, and we're going to run out of time. You certainly are wordy about it. No,
sorry.
Go ahead. What did you want to respond to what I said?
Well, I guess I'm really struck that you could walk into a room. I know it's true. I know what you said is true, but I'm really struck that you can walk into a room and find that people don't know who Augustine is, haven't read the Confessions. I know that happens. I've had the same experience myself, and I'm appalled at it. The Confessions is the first biography that was ever written, and Augustine is one of the most important fathers of the Church, had an enormous influence on our culture. And so I'm really deeply disturbed that people have not generally read him.
So we could sort of generalize part of the point that when we're talking about gifted students in general here, the people who study more and have this more innate capability for the intellectual life, but maybe it's saying something about the culture as a whole. It would be great if any professors could walk into a university classroom and presuppose that people had a certain body of knowledge or had read particular authors or knew particular books. We all know that doesn't happen, all of us who teach at the university level. And I think a lot of parents listening maybe who have not been to college and so on sort of assume that maybe a higher level of teaching goes on than we sometimes think, or that than we know happens. In other words, I think some people have sort of an exalted idea of what goes on at the university level. Many of us who teach there realize that so often we just can't presuppose much at all in the ordinary classroom, that we have to begin from scratch so often. And I used to just despair of finding almost any book that most students had read, or any body of knowledge that one could just carry with them, and assume that, hey, the people know this in the class.
And what you've said is indeed true. I think people generally have a very exalted notion of what an education consists of, what knowledge is. And I think that's unfortunate, because that is just one of the other obstacles that we need to overcome before we have a general population that will have read Augustine. As you can see, I wish that everyone would do that. And I believe that everybody could do that. There's no question in my mind that it's a very readable, very accessible kind of book. And the wonderful thing about the experience of reading it, that I disagree with the student who said to you that the ideas become part of him after he's been exposed to them. What I think happens, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but what I think happens is that when the student reads someone like Augustine who has formulated these ideas, he finds in that formulation ideas that he's already had himself. And he sees between himself and Augustine and the at least 1,500 years that separate the two, he sees a kind of bridge, and that he is a part of all of humanity. He is a part of even something as exotic as when did Augustine die?
430.
430. He sees himself as a part of the 5th century. That's an amazing experience when that finally happens for you.
Yes, surely. That's one of the advantages. I like the way you said that, because I think a lot of learning really involves that. That is, finding articulations that really correlate with our deeper experiences. They resonate with what we intuit is the case. I think very often the field I'm in of theology, that's what we're really doing, is trying to give words to experiences that people have had. Trying to find systematic ways of dealing or with experiences that are common, of finding categories that will help sort out what it is that we humans go through. And when we find something like that, I think it's sort of exciting. And And I think I saw that happening with a lot of my honors students this quarter, when they would latch on to a particular author, mostly because that author resonated with them.
Exactly.
Because this author
it.
is saying something that they have vaguely felt, or puts into words something that they've been wrestling with in one way or another.
That's the really important thing, I think, is that resonance take place, and your earlier point that education often presents an obstacle to that is what I find very alarming.
And maybe the rigidity of some of the education does that. I think my own sense is that, there's got to be this body of knowledge that is formed us as a people, that we carry with us, and especially from my own theological perspective, again, is sort of a religious body of knowledge that I would like people to get, whatever setting they're in, whether in the public system or in private schools and so on. Something, again, that articulates their experience, but is a common fund of knowledge, which allows us to talk and interact with one another. Jim, we started out talking about gifted students, and I think that you made the observation that one of the things you have to have in dealing with them is flexibility, so that they can program their own learning, take charge of it, have some initiative with it, and so on. And that seems to be a healthy, general kind of thing. Isn't it wonderful when people of all ages, backgrounds, so on, can get excited about learning and read something in common and have intellectual discussions and so on? Part of we'd like to get to that sense of wonder about education and excitement, and maybe, that much perhaps we learn from dealing with the gifted students.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.